It's time now for perspective. Over a week on from the devastating flash floods that washed whole neighbourhoods to the sea in eastern Libya, killing thousands, Libya is in dire need of assistance. Although years of war and division mean the country is badly ill-equipped even to coordinate the international help that's been offered. And similar criticism has been directed at Morocco after it chose not to accept all of the international aid on the table following its massive earthquake a week and a half ago that killed some 3,000 people. My guest today is Tarek Megerisi, Libya expert at the European Council on Foreign Relations. Thank you so much for speaking to us here on France 24 today. I'd like to start by talking about Libya. How would you characterise the situation on the ground right now in the east of the country?
Thank you very much for having me on, firstly. It's still chaotic. I mean, I was thinking today it's been a full week since the catastrophe first occurred. The first half of that week, the survivors were spent alone trying to deal with the magnitude of the catastrophe which befell them. And the second half of the week, they've been fighting their own government, their own army, to try to continue the aid and the relief effort, despite the efforts of these institutions to exert control and to look good, which is quite a horrible thing.
What would you say is the greatest risk to survivors on the ground right now, Tarek?
Well, there's a magnitude of threats coming towards them. I mean, firstly, you have the threat of disease from stagnant water. Wells and reservoirs have been corrupted by the flood water. There are insects which can spread disease. People are still burying bodies a week later. There's the risk of aid not reaching people who are cut off, who are starving, who are thirsty. Then there is the kind of medium-term threats. If these people are not rehoused appropriately, then when future rains come in the winter, landslides could come. You know, the ground under their feet remains unstable after the events of the last week. So unfortunately, these poor survivors are still surrounded by a plethora of threats.
Now, European countries say they want to help. They say they're ready to deploy help. How, at this stage, when the political situation in Libya is so fragmented, so tense, should aid from Europe into Libya be managed?
It's ironic, actually, because of the political situation in Libya and because of the chaos on the ground. I think the best vehicle for assistance is nation-to-nation assistance. Now, I know that this brings its own difficulties for countries because countries engage with other countries. They engage with governments. And in Libya, government does not control the territory in which the catastrophe happened. So there are coordination problems within Libya. There are political jealousies and rivalries that take place. But if you look at the teams that are working on the ground now, you have search and rescue teams from a number of different countries. You have field hospitals being set up by a number of different countries, including by France. And as the Libyan National Army, the forces in control of the region, try to take control of the aid effort and actually end up hindering the efforts of local aid and response workers, it seems more and more that unless you have the backing and the protection of a nation state behind you, you simply won't be allowed to work effectively.
Now, you've talked about it already, of course. Libya, governed by two rival administrations, one in the west, one in the east, and has been, it's fair to say, at war for years now. How did this situation pave the way for last Sunday's disaster?
Well, in a number of ways. I mean, firstly, it's the years, if not the decades, of negligence, of contempt from the governed to from the governments to the governed, and this comes from Gaddafi's era even. You know, the dams which broke had not been maintained for decades. And of course, this became more acute in the last few years as politicians across Libya, whether they're in the Eastern government or the Western government, they have no accountability. They have no local constituency. They feel as if they cannot be moved. And so they have no compunction to care for their people or to provide anything for their people. And so there were warnings last year that this dam could break. They were essentially ignored. Money was appropriated to repair the dam. The project was never carried out because of these issues of political rivalry. As the storms approached, meteorological experts tried to warn the local military authorities that this storm is coming and it could be disastrous, especially for the city of Derna, but other places as well. And what did these military authorities do? They ordered a curfew. They locked the people in the homes, which would become their graves. And by the time they realized the gravity of their mistake, it was far too late. And the only reason why this happened is because the city of Derna, the local people, are not allowed to have political representation that actually represents their views, their desires, and their needs. They are instead run by a military administration who none of them asked for, who are essentially prioritizing their sense of control and their sense of looking good over the well-being of their people. And so what was a natural disaster became a man-made catastrophe. And you cannot articulate enough the scale of this catastrophe, especially on a human level.
Would it then, in your opinion, be extremely naive to even hope there may be some accountability on the part of the Eastern Libyan authorities, considering the sheer scale of the destruction in Derna last Sunday?
I mean, you would hope so. And alongside the grief, there is a huge feeling of anger and frustration, not just towards the Eastern Libyan authorities, towards all of the Libyan authorities, because none of them have done their jobs. None of them have governed their people, and they have spent a massive amount of money to not govern their people. But unfortunately, all of them, from the parliaments to the governments to the military, who are more political than military, they are already shirking any responsibility. The Speaker of the Parliament told off the Libyan people for daring to blame him and the other politicians for the disaster which befell, claiming it was an act of God. Meanwhile, the army is out in the streets, the LNA, arresting people and trying to clamp down on any would-be dissenters. So they already feel like this pressure could come. I think now, unfortunately, as always over the last 10 years, if the desires of the Libyan people are to be felt, and we will get some accountability, and they will have to be supported in their cause and in their push by the international community, from the UN down to all the nation states that are involved in Libya and have been involved for the last 10 years or so.
I'd like to just switch our conversation now to a discussion of what happened in Morocco a week and a half ago. Widespread accusations of mismanagement of the aftermath of Morocco's 6.8 magnitude earthquake. Do you think that growing anger could pose a threat to local and national government in any way?
I think in Morocco, much like in Libya, the authorities are well used to riding the waves of public discontent and emerging on the other side. I mean, even remember as far back as 2011, when the Arab Spring swept everywhere else, Morocco was the state, or were the authorities that most effectively rode that wave. And so I think, like in Libya, the dispossessed, the victims will rail against the authorities, but at the end of the day, they will weather that storm.
Now, in Morocco, aid was accepted from 4 countries, including the UK, Qatar, the UAE, also Spain, but not from other countries, including France. Do you think that was a mistake on the part of authorities in Rabat?
I don't think that they see it as a mistake. I think it's a very calculated and manicured decision on their behalf. If these 4 countries you list, they all have 2 things in common. One is that they are all kingdoms, like the Kingdom of Morocco. And secondly, they have all been quite close to Rabat on their Western Sahara policy. And the Moroccans have said time and time again that all of their foreign policy comes through the lens of the Western Sahara issue. And this is another example of it. So perhaps it's not the best thing for survivors, and those on the ground, the victims, will see it as a mistake. But from the state's position and from the state's perspective, I think they had the luxury of choosing who they would like support from. And they picked very carefully to ensure that it made their position seem more effective, and it kind of, expanded on their current base.
And do you think there's any chance that in the weeks and months to come, European countries who want to offer aid to Libya, to Morocco, this is a chance for European countries to a certain degree, repair strained relations with both countries?
Absolutely. I think it will take some effort for them to do so, given the political obstacles in both countries that we just discussed. But if you go on the street, in either Morocco or in Libya or in elsewhere in the region right now, what is the opinion of Europeans? It's usually that, they will come and talk with their heart on their sleeve about Ukraine. But when it comes to us, to North Africans, to Arabs, and so on, we are just an arena to corral migrants in and to fight terrorists in and to always be kept at an arm's length. The European values do not apply here, so please don't discuss them. But this is an opportunity to show why that's incorrect, to show that Europe can build people-to-people relationships and what they can offer the people, and to start a new platform for a new relationship that will actually get the people on their side, which in turn will become more helpful for future economic relationship building, for when Europeans need support on crises like Ukraine, and in general expanding the European circle.
Nice to be able to end on at least a slightly optimistic note. Tarek Megerisi, Libya expert at the European Council on Foreign Relations, thank you so much for speaking to us on France 24 today.
Thank you very much for having me on.